never went into our grandparents' refrigerator like kids do nowadays. But when we left, Mom always had fed us lunch, and we'd go down to my grandma's, her mother's. And she'd say, now remember, don't ask Grandma for anything to eat. Well, my grandma baked bread, and she always put butter and sugar on the bread. And my mother didn't like to have us eat anything, you know, sugar or rich stuff like that. Anyway, so we'd be there for a while, just sitting, talking. There weren't any kids in the neighborhood that we knew, so anyway, then we kind of looked at one another, and we kept talking, and Grandma said, something wrong? And I said, well, I would love to have a piece of your homemade bread with, and so my mother gives us that look, but we didn't look too long. And pretty soon Grandma gets up and makes us a butter bread. But oh, that was so good. And of course, sugar, Mother didn't want us to have too much sugar, but Grandma didn't care.
A lot of my relatives all had farms out in Silver Lake and Hutchinson, and so that's some of the places we would typically go on a Saturday or Sunday was out there, and then our country cousins would take us, you know, we'd be running through the barns and the cornfields and everything else. Well, I suppose the grown-ups were still arguing about Roosevelt versus Hoover or something.
My other grandma, when I went shopping with her, she always had this certain kind of, they were called walnuttos in those days. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you can still buy them or not, but anyway, she'd buy a bag of them and she would hide them in her bedroom. And she knew I liked them. She'd give us one, and then that was it, you know, a big bag. So one time I knew where she hid them, and of course, me, you know, did not realize she'd counted them, you know. And she wanted to know, asked me if I took any candy from her. And I said, candy? What? And she knew I knew what she bought it. I said, no, I didn't. Must have been my sister. So I certainly didn't take it. No. So my mother was real upset with me. Then I couldn't go out for the day. But in those days, you know, when they sent you to your room, you didn't have a TV to go to or cell phone or whatever, computers. We were in our room, and that was nothing.
Oh, that he had written on there junior high, but he spelled junior with a U, you know, Swedish accent. Junior would be junior, so it was UNIOR, and I thought, how can Grandpa be on the school board if he spelled that way? He was a great guy.
Thanksgiving dinner, Christmas dinner at my grandmother's house, and I can remember after a big heavy meal, everybody retired to the living room, sat down on what we called the Davenport, and I was just reminded recently that that is an older term. It's now the couch or sofa. But we sat down on the Davenport, and it seemed like the majority of time the two big arguments were Hoover versus Roosevelt because of the Depression, and Ford versus Chevy. And they could carry on those every time. And I just was kind of fascinated to listen to them go back and forth about the virtues of their positions on those two subjects. Yeah, I went to Czechoslovakia, and as my son and I were just leaving the hotel, there was a person having a discussion with the clerk about whether he'd gotten his change or not. And the clerk was kind of insolent, but they were arguing in Czech, and I thought, I've got to stay and hear this, because the guy said, well, where's my money? And the other fellow, the clerk, says, well, maybe the guy next to you took it. And one says, well, I'm going to call the police. He said, well, go ahead. But it was all in Czech. I said, I got to wait and hear all this. And in addition, when we leave, I'm not giving them extra money to get into that discussion.